You're listening to the Farmers Guardian podcast.
Hello and welcome to a very special Farmers Guardian podcast. In this episode, we are going to try and unpick what this new Labour government means for farming. What can this new Defra team, so consisting of Steve Reed as the new Defra Secretary and also Daniel Zeichner as the new Farming Minister, can deliver for agriculture? So it's fair to say it wasn't a shock that Labour got into power. I don't think anyone was expecting the landslide victory that they did get. But nevertheless, a real kind of turning point really in politics. As NFU President Tom Bradshaw said, this is a reset moment for agriculture. I think there is a sense of optimism that a changing government can create change within the farming industry, but also maybe an underlying fear there of what's to come, because that level of uncertainty within the election campaign around what actually Labour's pledges are for the farming industry, because that manifesto was just so lean, only 87 words. Would you not agree?
Yeah, and I think obviously there's a bit of the historic things there. Obviously, the Labour Party historically has been very, very urban centric. So I think, in terms of people's traditional values and traditional vote, although they've been turned upside down a little bit in this election, that's kind of playing on a few people's minds about how committed Labour is to the countryside and to farming.
And I think what farmers want to hear right now is, okay, so what is this new Defra team going to bring down the line? What changes are they going to create? And I think it's going to take some time. I think there is some positivity that Steve Reed has remained in post. He was the Shadow Defra Secretary from September last year, so he's got to know his brief. Obviously, the Shadow Minister, the former Shadow Minister Daniel Zeichner, is a familiar figure within the farming industry and has a strong kind of voting record within the kind of agricultural remit. But in terms of what's to come, I think from previous interview that I've spoke to prior to the general election campaign, I think a land use framework is something that the Labour Party are really keen to implement, to get an understanding of how we're going to use the land with all that conflicting interests and different groups, for housing, for farming, for solar, renewable energy. I think they really need to get their head around that, and they want to publish a land use framework, something that the Conservative, the prior government, did promise to commit to and never delivered on. I think also pollution. I think water pollution is something that Steve Reed has been very vocal about. I think that is something that's coming quickly down the line. What changes will be implemented, how he looks to clean up the waterways is another question. Do you think there'll be further regulation? I'm not too sure about that, but I do feel confident that there is some action going to be taken quite imminent around that.
I think on the land use framework, they've moved quite quickly on several aspects of that already. So I think from our point of view, they will need to get the rest of that out, because they've already, Rachel Reed, the new Chancellor, spoke this morning about wind farms and how that is being brought back into government, those large planning decisions, and also that environmental projects that are already in the pipeline will be prioritised. I know we've got a lot of tenant farmers who are currently battling a lot of those big environmental, especially the solar schemes, and they've committed to the house building as well. So from our point of view, we do need the rest of that land use framework in pretty quickly, I think.
And there, you touch on tenants there, but there's two kind of elements to that for us and for farmers in general. Obviously, you've got your tenants that are going to be worried about potential solar developments. We've seen things like that, but also for landlords and for landowners, there's going to be diversification opportunities, whether it's a full solar farm or wind farm or something. That's something that they're going to want to watch in case there's a diversification there for them.
Yeah, because they're relaxing planning, aren't they? They're rethinking planning, and 300 new planning officers are coming down the line. So that will please quite a lot of people if things move a bit quicker, I think. So it's a mix, isn't it, at the moment? We've got some real positives, I think, and then we're going to have a few, possibly a few problems. But I think from all the farmers I spoke to, it was the main message was that they wanted competent government, that it was an end to people in and out. I think we've used the revolving door headline at several times at Defra, and I think a lot of people are just hoping they'll have something that they can focus on for the next 5 years.
And delivering on the promises made. I think it's important to pick up on some industry reaction here. The Tenant Farmers Association chair, Robert Martin, said, he's raised concerns around too much farmland being lost, in his words, to vanity projects like rewilding, and there was a need for a land sharing approach going forward. Very much TFA also campaigning for a more joined up approach across the government departments in Whitehall. So, communicating with the Treasury is a really important thing for them. And I think budget is a key issue that we need to talk about here, because Labour haven't really given any indication of what that farming budget will be. But we know from the Rachel Reeves that, there are going to be harsh cuts to be made and harsh decisions to be made. And it does make that agricultural pot of money quite vulnerable at the moment. And I think the sooner we get an understanding, obviously we will have the autumn budget, a better understanding of what that farming budget is going forward, I think that will provide a bit more reassurance to farmers.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if it grew. And I think
I don't think that's going to happen.
I think she sort of said this weekend they've been studying the books, and so I think if there was a 400 million underspend from Steve Barclay, which he admitted in March, if that money is just sat there, I can't see the fact. I can't see them, enhancing the farming budget at all.
It'll be interesting how they look to develop the current environmental land management schemes. They've said outright that they're not going to, completely rip them up and start from scratch, but they have recognised and acknowledged that there are changes to be made within that, but they are taking quite a hesitant approach. That they want to do that impact assessment to assess what's going right and what is going wrong in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, I think this idea, we've been all talking about the environmental schemes, and I think all of the parties besides Reform, or the major parties, were keen on keeping Elms sort of in its current form, weren't they? But that public money for public goods does fit in with, what Labour want as much as it did what the Conservatives wanted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of other industry actions, so the NFU, they very much want these practical policies that will revitalise farm business confidence. I think that is a key thing for them. Obviously, they did their survey where farm confidence wasn't an all-time low. Labour have recognised that, and NFU really want to see actions put in place to really restore that farmer confidence right now, particularly obviously off the back of such a bad weather period. They've also highlighted other areas they want the new Labour government to prioritise, for example, a fit-for-purpose seasonal worker scheme, supply chain fairness, which inevitably is going to come up, and how will they continue the work of the previous government around supply chain fairness in those different sectors. Would they do anything differently? I'm not sure. But also effective import control as well. So it'll be interesting how they deal with those various issues. Obviously, we have to talk about bovine TB, livestock farmers. It's a key issue for them. It'll be interesting to see how Labour navigate that. Tom Bradshaw this week said about how he wants to see the new government's commitment to food security by being alert to the risk of the impact of disease. And, he related to bovine TB and the need to continue with an effective and comprehensive eradication plan, which is based on scientific evidence. And that being essential in his words. But obviously we know that the Labour government, they've come out and said, towards the end of the campaign election trail, that they are committed to continuing the existing cull licenses, but with the end goal to, completely get rid of the badger cull and focus on more other ways to eradicate TB. So it'd be interesting to see how they navigate that, how soon those cull licenses will come to an end.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I think we said 87 words was dedicated in the Labour manifesto to agriculture, and 3 of those were ineffective badgercle, which obviously got a lot of backs up when the manifesto was released. That'll be a massive concern for, you know, farmers that are affected by TB.
Absolutely. And I think at this point, obviously, we need to talk about the devolved nations. I know the new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is really keen to re-establish a better relationship with Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. He's busy, you know, doing visits. I think yesterday he was in Scotland, obviously today Northern Ireland and Wales, really trying to build up that relationship. But I think when it comes to agriculture, Wales obviously has been in the spotlight quite a lot recently under the Welsh Labour government in Wales, and in particular, obviously, their sustainable farming scheme and how farmers have responded to that. Obviously, we reported on the protests that sparked from it. I think throughout the election campaign, Conservatives used the situation in Wales to try and put off farmers voting for Labour. But I think Labour were very clear, and I think, you know, from an interview I did with Steve Reed a couple of months ago, he was clear at that time that, you know, he was not going to replicate what was happening in Wales. But there is that underlying concern and fear there that how close will they come to those tree planting targets? Do you know what I mean? There is still that underlying fear there, because obviously in the manifesto itself, there was just such little detail.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's a quite a maybe a tactic, I'm not sure, but maybe, you know, it's a quite cunning by the Labour government to not give that detail, because essentially farmers don't have a way of holding them to account, do they? Because they haven't made such big pledges.
No. And I think in Wales, it could maybe follow that maybe it's beneficial for the Welsh farmers, and maybe a Labour government will intervene a little bit more and maybe pull back from some of the what the Welsh government has done. But I think it's quite an interesting state of affairs in Wales, because the farmer protests were so strong and, you know, were so passionate and, you know, really heartfelt, and you know, people really struggling, and it hasn't really impacted the vote at all. In fact, it's, you know, I think Wales is there's somebody's painted on the side of the house, aren't they, that they're a Tory free welcome to Tory free Wales.
Welsh Conservative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that's a reflection on what the poor farmers in Wales might face. I don't know, or whether there is just this sort of lack of real interest in farming amongst voters.
I think it'll be interesting as well to see how a Labour government in Westminster interacts with the Welsh government in Wales, because the tendency is to go, well, Westminster, you know, holding us back on that. They've not given us, you know, the budget or whatever the excuse is. It'll be interesting to see how they work with the Westminster government when they're both, you know, wearing the same colour ties.
And in the same vein, Alex, with the Westminster government, it's how long can they use that narrative of this is the mess that we've had to pick up, this is the mess we've inherited. You know, that's only going to last so long with voters. They want change. You know, the farming community want to see action straight away, don't they? And I think there is an understanding of that. You know, you just have to see just how quickly that cabinet was appointed, and you know, really evident that they want to kind of crack on with the job.
Yeah, I mean, because we've had some reshuffles, haven't we, that have taken days before people have, you know, trundled up to number 10, and then, you know, and that was all. Yeah, that was, apart from the MPs that didn't actually win their seats back, that, yeah, it was all done, what was it, about 90 minutes?
Yeah, it was done very, very quickly.
No, definitely. And, you know, moving to Scotland now, obviously very interesting results there. The kind of the decline of the SNP over there. I don't think anyone, well, at least them, didn't really expect that to be such a catastrophic night for them.
Yeah, well, they reduced to 9 MPs, was it, in Scotland, the SNP? So, I mean, that's a massive shift in the face of politics up in Scotland. You know, there's questions over what it means for their kind of independence push as well, because obviously, you know, whether a fall in SNP support at national level reflects a fall in independent support, I'm not sure, but you know, it obviously it's damaging for them. And they've still got an SNP government, you know, in Scotland. It's the Scottish government's still SNP, so you know, despite them having less power at Westminster, they still have the same amount of power in Holyrood until at least, I think it's 2026, the next election's up there.
Yeah. But the Scottish farmer, when I was speaking to them after the election, he was very keen that there was more coming now from Westminster, more support, and you know, a bit more of a joined up approach to UK agriculture, and you know, showing the world the best of UK agriculture. And yeah, he was very keen that be a more joined up approach to the industry.
I've noticed, Jane, I think you reported on it, didn't you, a few weeks ago, that what was it, Alex, at the Royal Highlands show, Mary said about how she hadn't really had much contact with the current Defra Secretary at the time, Steve Barclay. So maybe things will change under this new Defra team.
Yeah, so when I spoke to her, she was saying that she'd written letters to the Defra Secretary and had no response, that the I think all the devolved nations, they'd not had meetings with Steve Barclay, which he'd not, you know, he wasn't fresh to the role as such. I know we've had a, you know, big rotation of Defra Secretaries, 10 in 14 years, if you can keep up. But yeah, she was saying that she just had no response from them. So I think her line pretty much was, you know, just getting a response from somebody would be a good start, really. So hopefully, you know, Steve Reed's gonna answer her letters a bit more readily. But you know, I think the thing that they keep talking about up there, and I think it'll be similar in Wales, is this idea of a multi-annual budget, because you know, they say that they cannot develop the farm policy and give that certainty to farmers that they would like to do without having that multi-annual budget from Westminster, because they don't know, you know, potentially what's coming down the line, so they can't commit to a farming scheme for multiple years without knowing, you know, what's going to happen to the money that they're getting.
Yeah, and that it goes where it's supposed to go. I think that's been one of the problems in Scotland. Where
I mean, results in Northern Ireland, I think the big story, you know, obviously the political landscape is very different over there because the major parties don't stand because of the history. The main thing is, you know, the fall in support for the DUP, and Sinn Féin now pulled more seats in Northern Ireland than anybody else. What that means, you know, I suppose it's less in terms of agriculture, it's in terms of kind of, you know, whether there is, you know, the Irish border. Northern Ireland's obviously been a massive talking point for the sector in the past couple of years because of Brexit. You know, I think the main thing for Northern Ireland, you know, isn't even Westminster, it's Stormont, isn't it? You know, they had so long without a Northern Irish government there at Stormont, you know, that's their kind of priority at the moment, you know, make sure that that's running smoothly.
They've only been up and running, haven't they, for 2 or 3 months, I think now. So, and they've got an ag bill that they're trying to get through and work through. So I think, yeah, from their point of view, that's their focus. But it's whether there will be any alterations to the Windsor framework, whether there'll be any movement on that, and the rest of the borders as well, because that's proved quite problematical over the past few months since the changes came in at the end of April. So, but it'd be worth keeping an eye on the Windsor framework, I think, and see if that gets any more resolved, gets any less complicated.
And I suppose it's a change in, you know, tack from, is there a change in tack from Keir Starmer about that relationship with the European Union? I don't think anybody's, you know, expecting a massive change and you know, the UK to re-enter the EU or anything like that. But, you know, they've talked more about cooperation, I suppose, with the EU, and whether that's kind of a change of tone. Does that change then, you know, that trading relationship and things like that? That will obviously have an impact on the industry.
Yeah, because I think they've talked about more cooperation in terms of vets and that kind of thing, and BMPA are quite keen on that, and so there are areas, aren't there, where closer cooperation would be beneficial, I think. But it's where we fit in down the line, I think now, isn't it? So
I think it's also important to point out, and it's something that we've been reporting on already, but in terms of that Defra team, obviously we've lost the experience of the Farming Minister Mark Spencer, some other kind of that farming knowledge and expertise. I think from an outside perspective, the industry will be worried that that's lost, and I think it's now for that Labour team now to really build the confidence that they know what they're talking about and they're across their brief.
Yeah, I think with the Farming Minister, and certainly with George Eustace before him, there was this idea of, whatever your opinion on them as politicians, they did have experience and knowledge of the farming sector because that's their background. Whereas, that's not the same for the Labour politicians that are going to be in Defra. Whether that makes an actual tangible difference to farm policy, I'm not so sure. But, there's definitely, it's a big loss not having those kind of farmers around the table who know what it's actually like sat on farm when you're doing the books.
But I think what is wanted by farmers, and I take quite a lot of reassurance from the Right to Roam roundtable that we hosted last year with Daniel Zeichner, the Farming Minister. That was a roundtable with Daniel Zeichner and farmers in Derbyshire, and he was very open to listening to the farmers, hearing their point of view. And subsequently, months after, there was a change in Labour policy to Right to Roam, and they kind of withdrew from that more Scottish style of Right to Roam and that complete free open access. And I think that willingness to listen is something that was echoed by the CLA president, that rural communities and farming communities, the government can learn a lot from them. They are on the ground. And I think that's what farmers want is, okay, you might not necessarily have that inherent farming knowledge and farming background, but please listen to us and engage with us. I think that's really important. I think on that certain situation, when we did that Right to Roam roundtable, it was actually really welcomed and received that he made the effort to come out to this farm and spend a lengthy amount of time talking about an issue that was really, really of a concern. Let's face it, Right to Roam is something that is really important to talk about within the farming community.
I think when Keir Starmer was at the NFU conference in 23, it was about respect. I think that's what he sort of made it clear that it wasn't his, natural world. But he said it was about respecting what the industry did and how important it was to the country, and and talking to them and finding out, working in partnership, that kind of thing. So,
and that word respect came up with an interview with Steve Reed just a few months ago, that it was that recognition that the Labour Party hasn't historically had that respect for the farming and rural community, but this Labour government were wanting to rebuild that and restore that. And I think that's very much been at the forefront of the narrative coming out of the Labour government when it comes to trying to engage with that farming vote.
I think these, we know these conversations have been going on, they're not coming in and, having their first contact with the likes of the NFU. And all that, we know they've been talking to them for months. We've kind of known that there's going to be a Labour government in the next few months for a while, haven't we? But they've been having those conversations behind the scenes. Major kind of figures in the industry do have a relationship with Daniel Zeichner in particular that we're aware of. So they've not ignored the farming sector and then they're coming into it from day one.
No, and it'll be interesting to see who's on the other side now, who we get, who gets to be the shadow minister. I suppose that could be some weeks off, I think, maybe at the moment.
No, definitely. I think they need to figure out who their leader is going to be first. So yeah, going back to our initial question, what can this Labour government bring to farming? It's very complex, as we've tried to kind of unpick. I think it is still very early days. I think at the core of it is having more clarity on what Labour wants to deliver for farming. I think there is this sense of nervousness off the back of that manifesto being so slim. And right now, I think it would be good if the Defra Secretary Steve Reed came out and started giving a little bit more meat to the bone on some of the policies that he's looking to push through over the next couple of months, and a bit of a timeline, I think, on when he hopes to achieve that. I think that would give just some reassurance and settle the industry a bit. But I do feel there is some degree of optimism that this could be a reset moment.
Yeah, I think the first challenge could be very soon with the harvest. I think we could be looking at food will be back on the top of the agenda. There could be problems in not too long in the next couple.
And that's the thing is, that will be his kind of first challenge, is reacting to those, the day-to-day challenges of farming, which is the weather. You've got these long-term, big, ambitious policies, but actually, how is this Defra team going to respond to those short-term disruptions? I think will be key.
And as much as nobody wants to see empty, shelves in the supermarkets, but that has over the past few years, really pushed food up the agenda. No farmer wants people to be going to the supermarket and not being able to buy food for whatever reason. But we've had this whole, I think the food security is national security has been said to death, but it does sharpen the mind about how important food production is in the UK.
No, definitely. And off the back of just such a wet couple of months, I think a lot of the industry figures have all said kind of long-term projections. We might not be, suffering now, but later on in the year, we might be seeing it. It's just seeing how prepared this Defra team is for that situation, knowing that they've got that knowledge and insight now of what the situation could be. So are they going to plan for that? And are they prepared? But no, definitely interesting times. And obviously we're getting into the heart of show season now. So I'm sure the new Defra team will be out and about, speaking to members, speaking to the farming community about what they can deliver for them. Perfect. Well, that is our special podcast on the general election result, but please do look out for our other podcast episodes. Last week, we had an interview with the Red Tractor chair, Alistair McIntosh, looking at the future of farm assurance. So check that out.